Remember PCs that were like mini fridges? I do. They were called bare bones and were super popular at the beginning of the century. Cram every component in a small package, and this is what you get. This is a Shuttle XPC S21G5, released in 2006. It sports a AMD Athlon 64 CPU and a GeForce 6100 GPU on board. It also has a PCI and PCI Express slot on its motherboard. I bought this from someone on the cheap, who stated that the power supply was defective. It sports the option for a optical drive, as well as an option for a floppy disk or something. On the bottom there are audio in and out ports and USB inserts. It opens up by removing 3 screws on the back and then lifting the cover. The one thing I first notice here is of course a lot of dust. It's an almost 20-year-old machine, so that was expected. At least it doesn't look damaged. Here's that original Shuttle PSU that was stated to be defective. Let's just test it to be sure. Once plugged in, I press the power button. Yeah, that's a dead one. This is a small case, and in order to move around freely, I dismantle the front panel first. I do this by pressing in 4 clips on the top and bottom. It is, however, attached with a cable to the front panel PCB. I'll get back to it and remove the upper peripheral bracket first. I then remove the back screws from the PSU and remove it gently, because it's still attached with its wiring to the motherboard and is neatly tucked away through holes of the case itself. Once I removed all of this, I finally have some clear access to remove that front panel by removing that cable. I also have access to the CPU here. I dismantle its cooler by loosening the 4 bolts. I clean it with some alcohol on a tissue. While cleaning, I noticed that there was some white chalk, like residue next to it. It looks a bit like water damage, but that's something I'll get back to. Once cleaned, I remove the CPU from its socket. Once all peripherals have been removed, I work on getting a motherboard out of there. Just a few screws on the board itself, and a few in the back that hold the I/O plate in place. Now getting this thing out there is a bit tricky. There's not much room to squiggle this thing out. I feel like Austin Powers in that narrow alley trying to wiggle it. Never mind. There's another ribbon cable here that needs detaching first. I lift a brown clamp holding it down and pull it out. Okay, let's try that again. With some weird maneuvering, I somehow got it out. Let's have a look at it. Yeah, that's a lot of dirt. I blow all of it away with the air blower, then scrape some more of it with a brush. However, upon closer inspection, that water damage, it's more superficial. Problem is that it's on very small circuitry. I delve the brush in alcohol, and that seems to do the trick in removing it. I use the same technique on the rest of the board as well. There wasn't a clock battery in here, so time to place in a new one. I clean the socket just to be sure, then place back the clean CPU. There's this passive cooler on top of the integrated GPU. It's attached with plastic clips, but I want to clean this as well. In order to not blatantly break off these plastic clips, I slowly and softly punch them back in the holes. Upon detaching, I noticed that this wasn't as dirty as I thought it would be. Another tissue with alcohol does the trick. I reattach the cooler back just by clicking in those plastic studs. I further clean up the CPU, especially the edges. I got to work on the plastic front panel, which was just full of dirt. The air blower and a brush are the best options here. I lube up the push mechanisms, then turn it around to just clean it with a wet cloth. The peripheral cage needs a proper cleaning as well. Look at that CPU grind. Lucky for me, it's not that crusty, as it comes off easy with just an alcohol-filled tissue. The cooler itself is dirty, but with some wipes, easily cleaned. There's dust between the blades, and with the air blower, I get it all out. I worked the front of the case as well, as there was a lot of dirt hidden behind it. Same goes for the inside of the case, which looks like it's never been cleaned. Now this is just plain ugly. These standoffs on the bottom have somehow displaced themselves and moved around all those years, leaving glue marks everywhere. Time to fix that. Once removed, I clean those glue marks with some white spirit. This took a lot of scrubbing and patience. The white spirit softens the glue. I then scrape it with a plastic spudger, then hitting it again with white spirit. Once cleaned, I attach some new feet to it. Okay, that's all done. Time to put this thing back. While getting the motherboard out and now in, it's just as hard. Somehow, something was not letting me align the motherboard holes with standoffs on the bottom. There was this metal pin from the I/O plate that was standing in the way from the FireWire port. Since this thing wasn't that important, I decided to just clip it away. That gave way to fitting in the motherboard back in there correctly. I screwed down the motherboard, attached some cables, and placed CPU paste on that CPU. There goes back the cooler, and I reattach it. Same goes for the flex cable, but I also place in those missing in action RAM modules. I click back in the front panel, but pull through that cable through the whole casing. Then reattach that front panel cable as well as the SATA cable. Time to finally place in a new power supply unit. Instead of the original 250 watt, this one is a 270 watt one. I place in the P4 ATX as well as the motherboard ATX cable. That cage is a layered cake type of situation. I opted for a SSD option instead of a regular 3.5 inch one, so I place an SSD bracket in here. I first screw down the SSD down onto the bracket, but only to realize that the screws are too thick on the bottom of the SSD, and the side holes from the cage don't line up anymore with the bracket. Let's try something else. I attach the bracket to the cage with screws, then just double tape the SSD to the bracket. Now this thing isn't going anywhere, there aren't any moving parts, and it's not like I'm going to travel around the world with this thing. It's time to build this thing up. With the SSD in place, I opted to place in an SD card reader unit, which might be more useful than a floppy drive. I screw it tight, and I also attach the needed cables. The one thing I'm not going to use is IDE cabling, since I'm only using SATA components in this build, so I removed those. I chose this optical drive, which is a DVD drive. So far so good, and working on this thing is a very pleasant experience thus far. Getting cable management in proper order here is a bit of impossible, so I tend to just hide it as much as I can here. Working the other side is a bit easier, and I don't really have to use as much tie wraps to make it neat. Just one. Now for added fun, a Sound Blaster Audio 2 in the PCI port, and a GeForce 710 in the PCI Express slot. I don't know if any of this will work. This is just a guess. Time to close it up and see if this thing will work. So it powers up, and just my luck, no image. I was sure that I connected all the cables. I rebooted, but still no luck. I tried various things, like trying to get an image of the integrated GPU. At least the DVD drive and SD card reader showed some signs of life. I also tried connecting discrete GPUs, but still no luck. After many tests, I gave up and went back to it the next day with a clear mind. Clearly I was missing something here. I checked the official manual, and I saw that this motherboard needed not 2, but 3 ATX cables plugged in. Next to having the ATX motherboard cable and the P4 ATX cabling attached, there was also a PCI Express ATX that needed power. But there was only one problem. That PSU that I bought did not have a PCI Express power cable, and buying an original, so-called refurbished Shuttle one would set me back more than $100, with no guarantees. So I busted out this technique. I am going to salvage the PCI Express cable from the old PSU and solder it onto the new PSU cabling. Since I'm not going to use any of the IDE connections on the new PSU, I decided to cut that one out and solder swap it with the PCI Express cable. Since I only need 4 of the 8 cables here, I need to safely store the other 4. I choose to use welding clamps as a safety measure. After stripping the cables, I place heat tubes onto the cables. I pre-solder each tip of the required cables first. I do the same on the other end, and then it's time to solder the 2 ends to each other. I slide on a heat tube and seal it up. I do this for all 4 cables. Once that's done, it's time to put in the 3rd and final ATX cable, which should power the unit to boot up. Yeah, well, that didn't work, which is a real bummer. I also tested it again with a discrete GPU. Still no luck. I think the seller wasn't completely honest with me. He stated that the power supply was the only thing wrong here, but finding that moisture damage on the motherboard, I think that's a real issue here, and my guess is that it's affected something. I also checked out the original PSU, and on close inspection, it's clear that someone already tried to fix this. Upon opening it myself, I saw nothing weird at first glance. I think the water damage might have caused a short circuit. You know what? I said f it. Let's ditch this one and buy another one. This is a Shuttle XPC Glamor SG31G2. It looks the same, sort of, and it smells the same. But at least this one works, as the seller stated to me it shows the BIOS. This is a tad younger unit than the other Shuttle, boasting an Intel Core 2-quad CPU and 4GB of RAM modules pre-installed. It came with a discrete GPU, which is an ATI Radeon HD 4350 with 1GB of video memory. The CPU cooler looks the same, but there's an extra cooler on top, and there's a fan in the back mounted on top of the CPU cooler unit. I clip the tie wraps away from that extra cooler on top and then remove it. Then proceed to removing the original CPU cooler again, the same way as before. A lot of paste, loads to clean. At least the paste wasn't crusty, which makes me think that it wasn't there for 17 years. It wipes off easily. I replaced the CMOS battery with a fresh one. Then place back the CPU in its socket, add new paste, place back the CPU fan, and screw back the CPU cooler on top and on the back. I checked it out, and other than some dust, there's not much wrong here, so I take the air pressure gun and blow out all that dust. Back in goes that GPU. Now here's something unique. That peripheral bracket here isn't a peripheral bracket anymore in this one. Someone did a hack job on it. Maybe for more spacing or something? I don't know. Luckily, I have that other bracket from the previous shuttle. I placed it in the exact same stuff as in the previous build. The SSD plus bracket, card reader, and the DVD drive. Screw it all down and connect it all. I close it up and clean the exterior of the case. One last thing, just like the previous case, the bottom feet have again shifted away, leaving residue, using the same technique with white spirit and that plastic spudger, but this time I chose to reuse the feet by placing them back correctly. Okay, done. Now let's install something and play some games. At first boot, it shows a black screen. I've had this before, as I need to enable the digital input in the BIOS, since it only displays analog input at first. Now guess what? Instead of installing Windows XP on here, I'm going to install Windows 7. With that 4GB of RAM, it should be a better OS of choice. Problem was that none of my Windows 7 OS CDs would cooperate, so I chose to install Windows XP first, install all the needed drivers, and then add Windows 7 on top of it. Not the cleanest method in my opinion, but the only way it would work. Look, no question marks, everything checks out, so now it's time to install some games. Battlefield 2 has always been a comforting friend of mine. I've played this so much online back in the days. And on this Shuttle PC, it runs perfect, with maximum effects on and a resolution of 1280 by 1024. The same goes for Spore. I've never figured out how this game worked, to be honest, but it looks good and runs adequate. Now Need for Speed Most Wanted is a great test for all machines from this era. With everything maxed out, this is what I got. I mean, it runs, but the FPS isn't great, and the car model is all bugged out. This is where that SG31G2 GPU runs its limits. That 1GB of video memory is a true bottleneck for this game. Outrun Coast to Coast runs on everything. Pretty boring. Runs smooth as always. Don't mind me crashing into everything here. The Sims 3 runs okay enough, not super smooth, but is playable at the highest setting. Again, that 1GB of video memory is slowing things down a bit. Fable The Lost Chapters has the same problem at the highest setting. Games like this one would benefit if things were set a tad lower in the graphic settings. Hot Pursuit 2 is a pretty old but still fun game. This one runs perfect on the highest setting. The same goes for Unreal Tournament, which should be no surprise. But as a Command & Conquer fan, I wanted to test out Tiberium Wars. I placed in the DVD and it just kept spinning and spinning. Nothing happened. Guess this drive was busted, but I have a bunch of these, so I placed in a new one. Still nothing happening. Maybe my disc was damaged or something. I tried another drive. Still nothing. I then got all my drives out of storage, and what do you know, the first one from the PAL, which had this DVD of Turbo stuck inside, worked. I installed it, and this is how it runs at the highest setting. It runs alright. Again, the problem being that 1GB of video memory. In comparison, here's how the game runs, with 4GB of video memory on that previous PC build that I did. Same level, highest setting. Yeah, that 4GB of video memory makes a lot of difference. Which finally concluded the Shuttle experience. Am I satisfied? I am now. It's a real bummer. That first Shuttle PC was a bust. The second one made it all worthwhile. I do think I will replace that HD4350 with a better GPU in the long run. But for now, 3D games seem to run okay on it, on the higher settings. Another build made, another PC saved. I want to thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, I would appreciate a thumbs up. A subscribe is appreciated, as it will keep you notified whenever I release a new video. Now see you on the next episode.